It's the KMT. They control the legislature. They're playing a dangerous game on their defense budget. If anyone from Taiwan is watching this hearing, they need to realize they're playing a dangerous game.
I've always said that Taiwan is very important to the United States, but as you said, it's not an existential interest. Taiwan's efforts, I think, actually as a proportion of GDP, it's well below 3%. I agree with President Trump that they should be more like 10%, or at least something in that ballpark. We can't care more about your defense than you can, but we also need to do our part on the U.S. side to make real capabilities available in a timely fashion.
This morning, the committee meets to consider the nomination of Mr. Elbridge Colby to be Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Mr. Colby, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I have appreciated what I view as your clear articulation of the core U.S. interest in Taiwan, which are too infrequently discussed in the public here in America. As you wrote in American Compass last year, quote, "Nothing that could happen abroad is more plausibly and gravely threatening to Americans than China invading Taiwan." Unquote. Your 2022 article at Stanford has about as good a one-paragraph summary of our interest in Taiwan as I've seen. Yet in November of last year, some people believe your position may have taken a marked turn as you wrote, quote, "America has a strong interest in defending Taiwan, but Americans could survive without it." So, Mr. Colby, I'll let you respond to that, but specifically, can the United States enjoy a golden age for America with increasing prosperity for our citizens in this century if we fail to deter China in Taiwan, or worse yet, lose that war?
Well, thanks, Senator. Losing Taiwan's fall would be a disaster for American interests. The underlying logic behind my position is that the military balance vis-a-vis China, as you, sir, and your committee members, fellow committee members have amply and eloquently pointed out, has deteriorated dramatically. What I have been trying to shoot a signal flare over is that it is vital for us to focus and enable our own forces for an effective and reasonable defense of Taiwan, and for the Taiwanese as well as the Japanese to do more. So my position in terms of the value of Taiwan is consistent, but what I'm very fearful of, Senator, and I think this is agreed across administrations of both parties, is that, you know, the military balance has declined. So what I'm trying to avoid a situation in which, because we are not adequately prepared, we get in a situation, the analogy I like to use is Winston Churchill in 1940 wanting to send Spitfires and Hurricanes to the Battle of France, but Marshal doubting, saying, if we do that, we're not going to be prepared to be able to defend the home islands. That's a sort of an extreme example, but that's what I'm trying to avoid.
How soon will it take us to get prepared?
It would be essentially my number one, or one of my very top priorities, if confirmed, to try to get us prepared as quickly as possible, and then over the medium and longer term as well, Senator.
And you and I are absolutely united on that.
Great.
Thank you very much. Chairman Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Colby, you've advocated a reduction in support for Ukraine, which you characterize as a distraction from Taiwan. Yet former CIA Director Bill Burns, one of the most astute commentators about Russia, former ambassador, CIA Director, stated that no one is watching U.S. support for Ukraine more closely than Chinese leaders. And, quote, "One of the surest ways to rekindle Chinese perceptions of American fecklessness and stoke Chinese aggressiveness would be to abandon support for Ukraine." So what message are the President's actions sending?
Well, Senator, I'd say a couple things. One, my arguments about Ukraine have been based on the need for strategic prioritization. I don't contest the fact that the Chinese are looking at what we're doing in Ukraine at all. But fundamentally, Senator, my view, and I think it should be of particular interest to this committee, sir, is that we have to have the military capabilities in Asia, or relevant to Asia, to be able to conduct a local defense of Taiwan at a cost and level of risk that the American people are prepared to tolerate. And that has been my main focus. My aspiration, if I would put another, and to kind of build on what the Vice President was saying, a longer-term top priority for me would be, if confirmed, would be to revivify our defense industrial base so that we are no longer in a position where our defense industrial base cannot produce at levels where we can resource in multiple theaters at the level that we need. That's where we want to get back to.
I want to turn briefly to Taiwan. You have said here today and in your past writings that Taiwan is a critical matter for us. You wrote in 2016 that you thought we should give explicit security guarantees to Taiwan, reversing a decades-old policy of strategic ambiguity. You opined in the same way in 2020 in response to a hearing in the House of Representatives. Over the past couple years, you've started to say, as Senator Wicker pointed out earlier, that Taiwan is a vital interest, but it's not existential interest to us, or it's not essential to us. It seems that you have changed your thoughts somewhat in the last couple years. That is not, I suspect, because of Taiwan's defense spending, which, though still inadequate, I agree, has been trending upward for 7 straight years. So could you explain to us why in the last few years your views seem to have softened somewhat about the defense of Taiwan?
Absolutely, Senator. I've always said that Taiwan is very important to the United States, but as you said, it's not an existential interest. It's very important. The core American interest is in denying China regional hegemony. What's changed, Senator, as we discussed, is the dramatic deterioration of the military balance. So if I could use the Churchill example again, it's different to engage in a futile and overly costly effort that would destroy our military. And I know you've written very eloquently about this danger in your recent book. And the other point that I would say, Senator, is that I believe that we actually have implicitly our relationship and our commitment to Taiwan is largely implicit or indirect or customary. We actually have specified our commitment through things like the designation of Taiwan as the pacing scenario for the department. So my view that the combination of the greater threat from China and the lack of preparedness on our part, I have a different assessment with respect, Senator, about Taiwan's efforts. I think actually as a proportion of GDP, it's well below 3%. I agree with President Trump that they should be more like 10%, or at least something in that ballpark, really focused on their defense. So we need to properly incentivize them. So together, that means that my focus has been, again, with the shooting the flare metaphor I used earlier, Senator, to get Taiwan motivated, to avoid precipitating a conflict that is not necessary with Beijing, and giving us time and space to be able to try to rectify this problem, because that is my goal, Senator.
Just a note on Taiwan. To me, one of the critical questions is how much is Taiwan committed to its own defense? It's disturbing to me that in recent months, the Parliament of Taiwan has moved to cut their defense budget. And how are we to be expected to think about sending Americans into harm's way on behalf of a entity that doesn't seem all that interested in protecting itself? Are you disturbed by that move in the Taiwanese Parliament?
I'm profoundly disturbed, Senator, and I think the question that you're raising is one that I've heard not only Democrats but Republicans raise often in private. Secretary Mattis, who was mentioned earlier, said we can't care more about your defense than you can. So this is where I think I've been trying in my communication and my recommendations for policy vis-a-vis Taiwan to try to induce them in whatever way possible to become, say, more like South Korea. So it's a very plausible model with a much more serious military, because not only do I don't think it's fair to Americans to ask Americans and our servicemen and women to suffer at great if our allies are not pulling their weight, but also that it won't even be viable.
One more truth to power question. Last week, the United States ceased supporting the restoration and protection of the electric grid in Ukraine, which the Russians have continuously targeted. Yesterday, the administration announced its cutoff of military aid to Ukraine. Do you believe that those two things together, undermining the security of Ukraine in this critical moment, are good ideas?
Senator, as I said, I think the critical thing at this point is for advance in the peace process, and for us, including Kiev, to cooperate. I think there's an opportunity.
You're all about policy. I'm asking, do you think the cutoff of aid to Ukraine yesterday is good policy?
Well, Senator, I'm only seeing the reports recently, but I think we need to I think the president has a plan for us to end this war, and a sustainable model for a secure and sovereign Ukraine, and a Europe that can be more defensible. And I think that's the route that we should all take.
You've written in your excellent book, Strategy of Denial, that we need to provide a credible deterrent in the Taiwan Strait to prevent China from achieving regional hegemony. But on deterrence itself, here's my question. Is deterrence divisible for the United States? And what I mean by that is, when people say, well, we can let bad guys, Putin, roll in Europe, Iran, roll in the Middle East, but we're going to be strong in the Taiwan Strait. Is deterrence divisible in that way? I think it's not. Just look at Joe Biden, Afghanistan. Holy cow, that was a disaster. And guess what happened? And I predicted this. Every bad guy in the world was like, hey, I'm making my move. Putin probably would not have even invaded Ukraine had it not been for Afghanistan. Same with Hamas and Iran, with Israel. So is it, we got to rebalance, but is deterrence divisible? Because I think that's where you and I might have a little disagreement, and you get into the danger zone there. I don't think it is, but what do you think?
I think, Senator, that things are definitely interconnected, but what I'll say, and I recognize I'm over time, is that it's really important. I can't remember who said it, but you got to have the right stuff in the right place at the right time, and we need to make sure that we've got that. So we've got to do both of these things. We have to pay attention to the political credibility issues and how we're perceived, but at the end of the day, as you know well, given your distinguished military service, Senator, we need to have the right stuff in the right place at the right time to have the right effect. As I think Douglas MacArthur famously said, the two most infamous words in military history are too late, right? And I think that's really what that side of the equation is what I'm driving towards.
Let me go back to Taiwan very briefly. I would agree, and you talked about it earlier, it's the KMT, and it is the KMT, by the way. They control the legislature. It's different from the president's party. They're playing a dangerous game on their defense budget. And we all, if anyone from Taiwan is watching this hearing, they need to be, they need to realize they're playing a dangerous game, okay? Cutting defense spending right now is not the right signal. We all agree with that. As you know, the Taiwan Relations Act requires the U.S. to make weapons available to Taiwan for its defense. Every administration since 1979 has pledged to abide by that, and has. The Trump administration did a great job its first term. If confirmed, will you work with us to make sure we're going to turn the Taiwanese around, but that we will commit to work with Taiwan and us to comply with the Taiwan Relations Act?
Yes, certainly, Senator, and even more than that, I would make it a special focus to accelerate and revamp and focus those capabilities and expand them, those weapons transfers and sales and so forth, to assist Taiwan in its ability to defend itself. So I've mentioned the pressure that we need to put on Taiwan. I think you're absolutely right, Senator, but we also need to do our part on the U.S. side to make real capabilities available in a timely fashion, which we've not done a good job on.
Get those weapons out there. I met with the previous president. She had a great statement to me when I talked about will, and she said, will is often a function of training and capability. If you're stronger and you have weapons, we have this giant backlog, for example, of harpoons that we should be getting to the Taiwanese. So I think that's an important point that she made.